Sweet. We're recording. We're live. Rapid, not so rapid Friday. We've got 5 questions plus whatever else you guys come up with. And if we don't get to any questions that you guys have during the call, we will defer them to another time. Next Friday, Zoe's going to be out of town. So I'm planning on doing a nutrition kind of focused rapid fire session with Kylie. So any other questions, I think we'll probably defer to the following Friday. But that's cool. And there's Kristen. Hey, Kristen, good to see you. Let's
look at Avalanche.
Kristen, if you want to kind of like jump in on any of these.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, well, I guess we'll just start with Tom's question because I think it's an important one. Tom writes, easy runs. HR can be different by 15 beats. It seems at the same perceived effort level. Is that expected? I would say yes. Like your aerobic capacity, your zone up
Easy
to
is
aerobic
like
threshold.
the biggest zone.
Exactly. So you've got about 60% of capacity up to about 74%.
74% of your max heart rate is where it tips over.
Exactly. Before you go over above aerobic threshold. So it is fairly normal, I think, for there to be some heart rate variability there between runs. And this is kind of why I try to point athletes towards using perceived effort rather than maybe being beholden to what the heart rate monitor says. I think for many athletes who are well trained, that range of 15 beats actually could be more than that. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, Tom. I think that really is to be expected. Go by how you feel first, and then by the heart rate monitor second. Sometimes the heart rate monitor can kind of affirm how you're feeling. Other times it might be like, oh, this is a little bit off or somewhat different than I was expecting. But as we kind of talked about before, heart rate variability is really normal and it's an important sign of recovery.
And also in highly trained athletes, your ability to function within that easy effort, that sub aerobic threshold effort is just going to expand, right? Like for when you first start running, for like in less trained athletes, like that is going to be a much narrower zone. The fitter you are and the more training you do, the more playroom you have, because your max heart rate's going to increase, and then your ability to run at much lower heart rates also improves. So you just have like a lot more wiggle room. So your easy pace, like essentially in a super highly trained athlete, like a super elite marathoner, you could have someone who can comfortably run at like 7-minute 7:30 pace quite easily, but they could also have a pretty similar heart rate all the way down to like rocking 12-minute pace. And that's why you'll see a lot of elite marathoners running that's one of the reasons you'll see them running minutes slower than their marathon effort on easy days, because they just have a much larger space that they can inhabit. And that's something we can all learn from, is that when in doubt, chill it out a bit.
Also, I guess to wrap this question up, there are other things that affect heart rate, right? Like level of sleep, how recovered you are, caffeine intake. So when I used to run with a heart rate monitor and I had a coffee or a bunch of mates before a run, I would notice that my heart rate was elevated, but my effort level was the same as every easy run.
I'm
like
at
super
aerobic
relaxed.
threshold right now.
Maybe I doubt it. So it is normal. There's a lot of variables that attribute to kind of where your heart rate might be at on a given day. Always first check in with yourself and see how you're feeling. Does this feel effortless? Can I speak in 3 to 4 sentences out loud? Like, own that. Don't be afraid to be the guy on the trail who's talking to yourself for a minute just to make sure you're going at a conversational effort, because that everything hinges on the fact that you are. So don't guess. Make sure that you are. Um, for people who like to listen to music and stuff, you can sing 3 to 4 lines of a song, whatever you want to do. Just check. Your breath rate should be really low. If your breath rate is high and you look on the heart rate monitor and you can tell that your heart rate is elevated, most likely you've got to run easier. And so that's where we don't want to be beholden to the numbers or a specific pace. We want to have the flexibility to just like drop that effort level even more so we can keep things feeling good. I want to tie this into another question that we got, which was, is it mandatory to have 24 hours recovery time between runs? And recovery, I'm going to tie this in because recovery affects your heart rate a lot. Um, and I think for me, it's inevitable in the training process for busy people that you will not have a perfect 24 hours recovery time between runs, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if Zoe has anything more to say on that, but
I would say, just like if you can avoid, like if you have a run on Tuesday where you're doing strides and say you do that at 6 o'clock at night, I would not try to wake up and do your hardest workout of the week at 6 o'clock the next morning. That's just not going to be the most productive training for you. But like if you do that same workout at 6 o'clock in the evening, you could get up the next day and do your recovery run at 6 o'clock in the morning with like a tight, I would consider 12 hours a pretty tight turnaround.
yeah.
And just be cognizant that you aren't going to be as recovered and really intentionally run easier.
Yeah, I think at least for us, maybe we see that 24-hour period being cut a little bit in winter or during weekends, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you have a long run on the weekend that takes you into the afternoon, and then the next day you have a fairly long run as well. So like you're trying to get out on that early. And I think naturally you may be more in that like 16-hour recovery. I wouldn't put an expectation on that and just know like more recovery time is always better. But if you can't make it happen, getting your run in is probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
And like adjusting your expectation for the run based on how you feel, making sure you get a good warm up in so everything is mobilized and you feel loose and good and ready for the effort. I think that stuff is really, really important when you haven't had as much recovery as maybe you wanted to. And to make sure that you're owning stuff like eating before you run, making sure that you get out there or the night before that you're, really getting in good protein after, good carbohydrates. That kind of stuff is really important, especially when you're anticipating having a shorter recovery time.
Yeah, I would say don't drive yourself crazy trying to have the perfect training. Like don't let perfect be the enemy of good training, right? Like don't say, oh, I didn't get 24 hours recovery and then skip a run. Also don't, like hammer out a Tuesday run, then turn right around and try to have the perfect Wednesday run. Just cut yourself a bunch of slack and just know that, getting out there is better than not getting out there, and finding the correct perceived effort for that run is always the objective.
Cool. Yeah. Great. Well, I think we covered those first two questions, and I hope that made sense. Should we maybe we'll segue into the question about race specific training, because I think we're talking a lot about training right now, and we can talk about the gear and stuff after. How does that sound? Cool.
Yeah. I'll ask you this question because it was a question
yeah,
I got, and I like to interview TJ. I think it's fun. Race specific training. How much of your training should be race specific, which is training that directly contributes to a race outcome? And how is this different for trail versus road races?
Yeah, cool.
I think training specificity is super fun.
A really great question. as athletes who are working to become better runners all year round and not just training for any specific race, I would say the majority of your training is going to be about long-term growth, rather than race specific goal oriented training. For me, and what I would like really like to see my athletes doing is picking like 3 races a year where they really dive deep and and carve out 12 to 16 weeks of specific training, for. And I think inside, especially for trail runners, I think I'll speak
Can you
mostly on trail
define race
running.
specific training for us?
Yeah, like for me, I think in that 12 to 16 week block, not for me, for the way I coach people, that means spending a lot of time on similar terrain to your, specific race, and spending time at the effort level you're going to be running, during that race. So if you're running 100, we're going to get really comfortable running easy, and working on pushing that aerobic threshold up. And that's going to define 12 to 16 weeks of specific training, ideally where your long runs and maybe some of your workouts, if you have that flexibility, are going to be done on race specific terrain. Um, I also, I think that the other side of this is any good program has a balance, right? So even if you're specifically training for 5K all the way up, the time that you spend at or around that race intensity, or if you're running, ultras, the primary goal within, a 12 to 16 week period is to boost your aerobic threshold. So when you're running easy, you have even more bandwidth. Things feel, about easier. You've got this capacity that will allow you to, move through the day in a sustainable way. The goal there is to like balance that with maybe some time on non-race specific terrain, just to keep. I like to keep the
Like
turnover dialed.
strides,
Yep, strides and things
even if
like
you're
that.
running a hilly 50K.
Yeah, because it's important, I think, to reinforce some of the long-term growth aspects of a good training program, which is to do hill work, which is to do your fast strides. So I think at least for a lot of athletes that I coach, you will see like very race specific workouts and things like that, in that 12-week period, where the goal is to like, you're running that longer hill interval, but then to turn around and run realistically back down, things that are going to be supportive of the race effort itself.
And you see those a lot closer to the event because,
Exactly.
training methodology holds that you train, you train like more fundamentals further out from an event. And as you get closer, you train those specifics.
Right. And I think,
or you train like further out from an event, you train things like slower moving systems, right? Like things that we're always improving, like economy. And if we're trying to, get a super specific adaptation, like I think of 5x3 minute hills, 5x2 minute hills with realistic rundown, usually we put those a lot closer to events because we're looking for super specific, highly trainable adaptations. Like those are slightly more malleable systems. Like aerobic threshold is more malleable, than like VO2 max or running economy, which you can always be reinforcing. So that's something that's, I would consider that not specific training. One thing that I really love about traditional ultra running training is that because ultras are run below aerobic threshold, when done correctly,
yeah.
every day is basically race specific training, right? Whether or not you're doing speed work or aerobic base building, because these events are so aerobic, every single day is technically considered race specific training. This gets a little bit more murky when you're looking into running like a road marathon, because the intent with that is you need to essentially get really good at really nailing specific intensities. Rather, when you're running an ultra, it's like getting good at nailing broader intensities. So for marathon training, it's a lot more specific than ultra running training. So you have to already, like, to do pretty advanced marathon training, you have to come in with a fairly developed aerobic base. And then we'll spend a lot more time at desired, particularly because on a road, you're going to be looking for specific paces. So we'll really practice running specific paces, specific intensity levels, and spending more time there than you would see with some ultra training. We've definitely been adapting a little bit more, like taking from the road marathon world and mixing more tempos and things into long runs, like spending a little more time flirting with that aerobic threshold, which is something that I really like from marathon running that works really well for ultras as well. But when you, it's when it depends on the goal, how specific you need to be, essentially.
Yeah,
You know?
I would agree with that. I think especially when you're talking about faster races, right? You've got to get really comfortable in probably that. I like 12 weeks. I think 12 weeks is the minimum of what you need if you really want to buckle down and go for shoot your shot at like an A race. Spending a lot of time at those intensity levels and being comfortable. The faster the race, the more comfortable, being uncomfortable you need to be, because you're going to be above aerobic threshold generally. Especially if we're talking about half marathon and on down. That's the nature of how fast those races are for any level of athlete, I think. If you're pushing it, if you're not just trying to go out and to get it done. And the nice thing about, running ultras, as you said, like every day running easy helps to reinforce being successful at those events.
It's specifically training a system that you're using during a race. Like in a marathon, like, yes, it's obviously still aerobic, but because the intensity that you're performing at is higher than what you're training at, it is, those days are still important to build up the aerobic base, but they're less integral to the pace specific outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I think we
Sufficiently bored everyone
we
with
nailed
training
that.
methodology.
Kristen, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to, the faster race kind of idea about training specifically for faster races and road races, because I don't know, you've got a faster racing background. Anything that we didn't cover there, if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, totally. I'm gonna admit that my internet was a little choppy. So I didn't like hear everything, but I do think that to Zoe's point about like the slower, like the easy days being easy is super important. And then just really focusing in on the speed work when you have it. I mean, you can run, as slow as possible on your just like training days. That's not like, those miles aren't junk miles, that's active recovery. And so when you do your workouts, I think like the speed aspect and the speed component of that will improve your fitness. But I think it's important to note that during these sorts of workouts, you're not proving fitness, you're improving your fitness.
Yes.
Totally.
I love that point.
Yeah. So you're not just going balls to the wall all the time, and you're taking care of yourself. So I think listening to your body and kind of knowing what you can handle on a certain day is super important. And if you're feeling terrible during a workout day, it's okay to slow down your intervals or your reps. Like, as long as you're getting it in, you're still showing up, you're still doing the work, you're improving your fitness. So, if you have 10 by 1 minute, for example, and you're just, your warm up feels like garbage, like, this happened to me, this happens to me, it happens to everyone, it's still important to do the workout. But you can take the pressure of doing it as fast as possible off your plate, because the goal is to improve fitness.
Yeah, I like that so much. And I think it's really important also to note, when you're trying to kind of reinforce the speed aspect of things, the other side of that, the way we balance that out, is running super easy on easy days. We're not out there proving that, this is my easy pace. And I don't want to fall too far down that rabbit hole, but something that I think is really important, especially as athletes continue to get better, is to run even slower on easy days, because the faster you get, the more impact forces your body is going to, be incurring. So, as you develop and get stronger, the more important it is to run slower. Even though you can run faster, like Kristen says, you kind of save it for the speed work. And that's something that I think all of us can improve on, myself included, for sure.
Yeah. I also think it's important to note too that like when you're, oh my God, when you're doing your easy days, sorry, there's like a circus happening here. When you're doing your easy days, it's really easy to fall into the comparison game with Strava, and you're like, oh, I only ran 9-minute pace or 8-minute pace or 10-minute, whatever your pace is. Like, turn off pace on your watch, go by feel, because really, like, you're focusing in a lot of your energy for those faster days. So you need the active recovery in between. And you're not, we're not in high school. We're not racing every training run. Like that's, that's not what we're doing here. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah. I love that point. Don't let your ego undermine your training.
Yeah, totally. And I think, when you are in those specific blocks of training, keep that in mind. Every run has to be on the perfect terrain for your event. You want to strive to get some runs in with similar elevation change per mile, especially I think on the long run. I think that's really important if you really want to dive into race specific training. But no, like if you're spending a lot of time doing this, be out there on trails that are fun for you. If you're not feeling it and you don't want to like crush a bunch of vert because you have a steep mountain race coming up, sometimes it's okay to defer from that or to just take it even easier and just to lower those expectations. So always check in with yourself. I think it goes back to that like perceived effort thing. At least for me, it does, because not every run during a 12-week specific, build towards your A race is going to feel good, especially as you get towards the final, the middle of that block and towards the last 3/4 of that block. There's going to be a lot of fatigue, and you're going to have to give yourself a little bit of grace and know that just because maybe your output levels weren't as good as they were in the beginning of the block when you were fresher doesn't mean your fitness has gone anywhere. That's the point of having a taper after all of that, so we are prepared for the race. Okay.
I totally agree with that. And just want to add too that, like, even during your easy runs, like, I mean, hills are hard for everyone unless you're TJ,
They're hard.
I guess for Zoe, you guys are like mountain goats. But I feel like hills are hard for everyone. And if you need to run up a hill slower, you're still running uphill. You're still getting the benefit of running uphill. Totally. So don't like
you should adjust your pace.
Yeah. It's like, don't beat yourself up if you don't PR every time you run up the same hill. It's like,
in fact, if you do PR every time you run up it, you are absolutely training incorrectly.
Yeah, you're doing something wrong. So I think it's important to just like give yourself a lot of grace and patience and just understand that like you're still putting in the work, like going uphill is going uphill, whether you're sprinting it or jogging it or walking it, if that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heck yeah. I love walking.
Yeah. Don't sprint a lot of hills.
All right, let's dive in.
My turn to answer?
Yeah, Zoe, this is your specialty. What and I like this. Kristen, feel free to comment too if something comes to mind. We've got a group run coming up this weekend, and we're thinking about like how do we build some confidence to show up to our local group runs.
Yeah, this is a question we get from a lot of athletes who are like a little bit nervous to go to group runs. And I think I don't like to coach from personal experience too much, but I also feel a lot of anxiety about going to group runs. Mm-hmm. So it's super normal. Everyone, like a lot of people feel that way, which should help give you confidence to know that like if you go to a group run, likely there are other people there who have some of the same anxieties about like being slow or like not, having the right shoes or like being enough of a runner. And those are super normal feelings, but just know that a lot of other people are going to be having those as well. And I will also say that like, if you go to a group run and your fear is getting dropped, like you should not want to run with people who will drop you, right? Like those are not people you want to run with. Like that's not fun for you. That's not fun for anyone. So that's just kind of one of those things. Like if you're sussing out, do I want to go to a group run or not? If you do go and and your worst fears, are confirmed, that can be very healthy for you because, working, like having that happen to you and then realizing that you're still like, okay, and a great runner and mm-hmm. alive and valued, can be really good. But also it's like a great way for you to know, like, yeah, these people don't, I just don't want to spend my time and energy on people who aren't going to spend their time and energy on me in the way that I want them to. And that's super okay. It's okay to speak up for your needs at group runs. If you're like, hey, I'm going to be rocking 11-minute pace today, who wants to join? Like, that's super important for you. Like, do not let, like, when you're running with a partner or you're running with a group, do not let people push you out of your comfort zone, because that's counterproductive to your training. A lot of times you'll be running with people who aren't as savvy to training methodologies as you are. So feel free to shower them with love and knowledge and spread the gospel of running below aerobic threshold on a regular basis. And just know, like, for, you know, a lot of times for me, I will struggle at group runs because I'll show up and I'll be running with people who are running significantly lower volume. And so they'll be trying to run harder. And I'll always just be like, you know, I'm running my like 40th mile this week today. So like, I'm not trying to PR my 10K. So if you want to chill with me in the back, like, awesome. And just like express your needs, express what's comfortable for you, and know that there's probably other people at this group run as well who are feeling a lot of the same thing. And don't let a lack of confidence keep you from like getting out there and going to group runs. I used to be super afraid. Like when I first moved to Boulder, which is a very intimidating running scene, I was just scared, like just so scared to go to group runs. And that's how I met Kristen. So I'm really glad that I did finally get up the courage to go to group runs, because like, you know, I mean, I got dropped so hard on Chautauqua one time, and I was fine. Found my way home, lived to tell the tale. But, you know, I did meet some really amazing people, like lifelong friends along the way. So, you know, don't let fear or lack of confidence keep you from these things. Practice having confidence by putting yourself out there and going, because the worst thing that can happen is that you just end up still getting a good run in. And just like be that person in your running community who stands up for others in the group run, who stands up for themselves. People are super attracted to that kind of confidence. People want to run with people who know what they're doing in their training and who have goals and ambitions and like respect for their hustle. So just don't be afraid to express those things. And, you know, you can always ask a friend to join you too. Like if you're wanting to go, like I've definitely invited TJ to go to group runs with me, because I was like, I don't really know anyone. I don't really know, you know, what I'm doing. And sometimes just having a partner can make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think own your plan, own your training when you go to a group run. If you've got some strides to do, I see this a lot with my athletes. They'll go to a group run and they'll skip their strides or their hills.
Still get those in.
Yeah, don't skip your strides and your hills because you're on a group run.
That's like 5 minutes of work, you know?
Right, exactly. You can do that in the middle. You can do it at the end. There's a reason we don't always say do the strides in the middle, or, you know, it's so that you have some flexibility. And so own your training and be really confident in that, as Zoe mentioned. I think those are kind of my number one rules for me. And when you go out there, be respectful of what your easy effort is. I think in our group runs around town here, we have a really great running store in Carbondale, and they have group runs. And when I've gone, I run in the back.
Oh, I've gotten dropped so many times by that group.
Yeah, it's
just they just train at an intensity that I don't wish to train at.
Don't fall into the habit of trying to run hard because other people are. Respect your training and your effort. And I think the more you reinforce that, and maybe this goes a little bit back to like the positive affirmation side of this that we talked about last, it was in one of our last calls about building confidence. Have confidence that your plan is right for you and your intensity levels are right for you, regardless of what other people are doing.
And if you're worried, you know, about like, you know, being the chill caboose, like there's likely so many other people that feel that same way.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
like, and they're just being pushed out of their comfort zone. So if you're brave enough to stand up and be like, I'm going to chill to the max, likely there's other people who will be really into that and will join you.
All right, let's move on to, in the interest of time, there's got a lot of questions on gear. I like to skip over gear questions because I think that people should experiment and get used to this stuff on their own. But Zoe is a gear expert, and so she's going to give us some 101 to hopefully like help people formulate some kind of baseline for choosing gear for, and this is really specifically for like rainy weather and maybe a little bit of snow, because we're kind of in that that shoulder season time of year where it's not quite snowing yet, but it is a little drizzly at times. So this is a pretty important topic, I think. Zoe, like, what are your recommendations in terms of like, should I wear a jacket? Should I not? Like, how do you look at this?
Yeah. So my rule of thumb is to dress. So before I go out on my run, I check the weather, and whatever the temperature it says on my phone is, I'll dress. And this, varies from person to person, but I would recommend dressing as if it's 10 to 20 degrees warmer than it is, right? Because you're going to get pretty warm on your run. And you're always going to just start a little bit chilly. And one way you can kind of negate that as well is doing an appropriate warm up in your house before you head out. I'll do like a lunge matrix, some jumping jacks, a little bit of ankle mobility, just some stuff to kind of get the blood pumping so that I'm like pretty warm before I head out on my run, particularly on chilly days. Because you can get pretty crunchy ankles when it's like 11 degrees outside. Yeah. But I would, depending on if you run colder or warmer, dress for 10 to 20 degrees warmer than it actually is. In terms of jackets, there's a lot to consider there, but I think the primary thing is don't make it your goal to remain completely dry, because that will just not happen, right? So there's kind of different thoughts on types of shells or like outer layers. You can have like kind of a lighter windbreaker, like a Patagonia Houdini layer, which are those really small, crinkly, kind of like wind shells that, stuff down into a really small pocket and you can put in a running pack or in a hip belt or something. Or you can get a burlier, like taped seam jacket that's like fully waterproof instead of just water resistant. So with a waterproof jacket, you're going to prevent more rain from coming in, right? Like, so the primary objective there is protecting your base or mid layer from being wet, but you're still gonna sweat. So you want to make sure that you have a base layer, or I would recommend a base layer that's like close to skin, that's a little bit tighter fitting, that helps like temperature regulate on the bottom and wicks moisture away from you. I hope that this goes without saying, but avoid cotton for peril of death. Cotton is terrible. Don't wear cotton.
Goes for socks too.
Yeah, definitely don't wear cotton socks. Man, I don't think anyone would make it this far if they're rocking cotton socks.
You never know. Like those Nike High socks.
Yeah. So look for base or mid layers that wick sweat away from your body. And then in terms of your shell, like a lighter wind resistant layer can help keep a little bit of the chill off. A water resistant layer can help keep a little bit of the rain off, but you are still going to have moisture because as good as a lot of jackets are, they're still going to just trap a little bit of moisture.
I do want to clarify something. So I might have heard this wrong, but it sounded like you said dress for 10 to 15 degrees warmer than it actually. Okay. Yeah. But I think athletes should dress for the temp, for assuming they're going to get warm. And so to not shed a layer.
That's why you dress for warmer.
No, for colder.
No.
Wouldn't you dress for colder?
No. So like if it's 50, if it's 50 degrees outside, I'm gonna dress like it's 70 degrees, and I was going on a walk.
Okay. So you're gonna wear less.
I'm gonna wear less.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. So the goal is to prevent you from having to shed layers or from overheating, because I would actually say, you never want to be like underdressed, but a lot of people tend to err on the side of being overdressed. Right. And then that makes you sweat too much. And then you'll actually end up being colder in the long run. And that's something we really want to avoid, or shedding layers. Also take into consideration, like when you're getting dressed, not just what the weather is, but what your workout is. Like I'll bundle up a bit more for my easy runs than for workouts. Like it could be 11 degrees and I'm wearing shorty shorts and like a base layer. With gloves.
Yeah, good point. Because your output levels are going to be higher, so you're going to be much hotter.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that.
So dress as if it's warmer than it actually is, because you will generate your own heat, is what I'm saying.
Got it. Perfect.
And 10 to 20 degrees is just kind of like a heuristic for addressing that.
Yeah, I mean, some people are a little bit more sensitive than others.
Totally.
I think sometimes in the winter, when it's cold, I'll wear like shorts and a t-shirt, but I'll have gloves because like my hands are cold.
Yeah.
What about shoes? What's up with the like Goretex shoes and things like that? Should people be considering those on rainy days, or when
personally don't like Goretex shoes. I find that, they tend to cost a little bit extra. And while they might initially prevent a little bit of water from getting to your socks initially. Once your feet do get wet in a Gore-Tex shoe, they're going to stay a lot wetter. Gore-Tex shoes tend to be less flexible and can affect your stride in undesirable ways. They're heavier, they're less comfortable. They tend to have, in my opinion, overly aggressive treads for some, for a lot of the weather. Even when I'm running on ice, I tend to just wear trail shoes rather than road shoes. I don't go full like Gore-Tex ice bug chain up kind of deal. Though once again, people should see what works for them. But I recommend people, unless they have a Gore-Tex shoe they really, really like, I don't find that they're worth the investment. I find that you're better off investing in some really great socks that are just like essentially better at keeping your feet warm and dry.
Yeah, if you have sensitive feet or have been dealing with any like plantar issues, things like that, I would steer away from the Gore-Tex shoes because they often have a plate underneath the footbed of the shoe to keep water from coming up from the bottom. And that makes for a much stiffer ride, which I know as someone who constantly deals with foot issues, and maintaining my feet, making sure that they're happy. When I use Gore-Tex shoes, my feet get sore much quicker. So I try to steer away from them. Also, they're not very breathable. So if you get hot out there, that moisture is going to stay in the shoe. They're not going to dry that quickly. Sarah, we're already talking a little bit about winter running. I don't really want to go too far into that because I think that maybe deserves an entire 40 minutes or something. But micro nano spikes, I think actually I don't like either of them. I put wood screws in the bottom of my shoes.
Wood screws?
Yep, wood screws.
Huh. I use La Sportiva. What I like to do is I'll take a pair of road shoes that I retire from like a previous year that still have a little bit of life in them, that are my like apocalyptic weather shoes, and I put La Sportiva ice screws in them. And then those are the shoes that I run with on like super gnar days. I think most of the time in Carbondale, I've gotten away with just wearing trail shoes.
Yeah.
I'm pretty reluctant to wear micro spikes or nano spikes because I would only wear those in an instance when I'm guaranteed to not interact with concrete at all.
Yeah,
because they are heavy, they're annoying, they're clunky, they affect your stride. They just like I am personally not a huge fan. I've tried so many, like as a professional gear tester, and I haven't found a pair that I'm like, these don't bug me at all. But it also depends. Like if I was running flatter gravel trails in Boulder that were like somewhat icy, I guess they would maybe be good. I'm not and maybe we can address Skylar's question as well as part of this, but I don't tend to run trail at all in the winter because I don't like moving slowly on snow.
It's just not that fun.
It's not fun, and it's not conducive to promoting better running economy.
Yeah.
If you want to like go have like a fun adventure day every so often on the snow and on the trails, that's fine. But in terms of the risk to reward ratio, it's pretty low for snowy trail running, in my opinion. Some people love it, rock it, it's great. For me, I don't find that like, the potential neuromuscular adaptations I would get from running trail a few extra times a year are worth the, trade-off of like you're moving. I personally would move significantly slower in a way that is detrimental to both my running economy and then, working two jobs. I just, I would rather, if I'm running like 8 to 10 miles, I'd rather just like run around the golf course than like slog it out on the steep trails nearby on snow.
Let's steer this away from maybe your specific training and talk slightly more generally.
What I'm saying is like generally moving slower on trail has negative training adaptations.
Right. So
that's not specific winter, to me. That's training.
Okay. In winter, guys, normally we're having you guys run really low volume, right? So we're working on spending 40 minutes, maybe instead of an hour out there, or doing, instead of 8 miles, doing 6. And the whole point is because it's hard to run in winter. We don't, it's not that fun, but we can optimize what you do by adding in some speed work, so you get a lot more out of that time. And so if you're going to go, for an adventure and slog on the snow, that may not be in line with like maybe 8 weeks of very specific speed related training that a lot of athletes are going to get into in the winter. Sort of maximize the minimal amount of time that you've got out there. So it doesn't always make sense
to go a similar pace on snow as that I would on not snow on it, or that any runner would do on a trail. You're going to have to run harder, right? Because the surface is softer and it's less efficient. You're losing energy in terms of it being a soft surface. And so you're expending more energy for less return, which is counterproductive for good economy. Every so often, sure, go have like a fun adventure. But I tend to prefer focusing my own training and my athletes training on speed and economy in the winter rather than trying to get like neuromuscular trail adaptations, I guess.
Great. So what about training in bad weather? I think this will probably be our last question unless somebody has any follow-ups to that. But gosh, I mean, the weather in the winter and fall sometimes gets a little bit funky, and people are asking, when should I decide to stay indoors and when should I decide to go out?
I would say stay inside if it's dangerous to go out.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be super counterproductive for your training. Like if it's super windy and there's a blizzard and you have a workout, I think it would be more productive to hop on the treadmill and like emphasize that running economy, emphasize that speed, than like have a higher power output for less return for an outdoor workout. Or like if there's ice, if it's raining and there's lightning, I would strongly don't run if there's lightning, right? Like for obvious things when your health and safety are at risk.
I would crazy storm.
Yeah. But I would say, otherwise, and, if you have access to a treadmill, like awesome, that's great. There are definitely athletes who don't have treadmill access and who will miss runs because it's rainy. And my advice is that you can't control what the weather is going to be like on race day. You can't control what the weather is going to be like. So you should probably practice working through some challenging weather situations. Once again, never do it if it's going to be detrimental to your health or safety.
I'll never skip a run for bad weather unless it's lightning. I mean, we don't even get really that down here. And that is for the same reason, and I don't want athletes to skip runs for bad weather. If you have access to a treadmill, great second option. But reinforce the mental toughness that you will kind of start to build out there on a snowy, jog through town for a half an hour even.
Or modify. If it's super rainy and you're going to get wet, and it starts to kind of cross into that territory of like, I probably shouldn't be out here running when it's like 38 degrees and rainy.
Yeah.
Modify, maybe just 30 minutes, but don't skip altogether.
Exactly. Yeah. We did a horrendous rain run about a month ago. And I felt like for doing like 20 miles, I really just overdid it. I felt like that was like the tipping point of a tough training block for me. And I should have just done 10 miles or something and done the long run the next day. So yeah, like know that you can cut those runs a little bit short. Remember, 20 minutes is always great. Yeah. If you've got a tough day or bad weather, you don't really love to like slog it out in the snow because it's not always that conducive to maybe a block of speed work that you're doing in the winter. So cut it short. 20 minutes is better than no minutes. And, don't let the weather stop you. Put on a jacket and get out there. Looks like if you live in the Pacific Northwest, you learn to run in the rain and mud, or you don't run outside from October to April. That's awesome. Thank you, Krista. I love the mental toughness and resilience that I'm kind of reading between the lines there. I definitely, I think about, I don't know, Jason, if you're trying to chime in, but as an upstate New York guy, you run in the most fierce weather I've ever, seen in my training logs.
I was going to say, I've taken to Tommy's block party as great training, because if I'm looking and I see the sky and I'm like, it's going to storm, but it's not right now, I'll just get as much done around the block as I can, and sometimes I get a full run. Sometimes the storm hits, and I'm like, all right, I'm diving inside. So I'm never too far from home.
That's awesome. Exactly. Make do with what you have. I think part of being consistent in the winter and working through some of the challenging weather and things like that is about adapting your training to kind of the environmental factors and the circumstances at hand, right? So like instead of driving to a trailhead, maybe just do that run around your neighborhood knowing you might just get 20 minutes in and being like, hey, that's totally cool, because then I'm
20
gonna
minutes more than nothing.
yeah, and I don't have to necessarily make those miles up. I can kick my feet up after and feel good that like I stayed consistent.
Yeah. And the more that you run in suboptimal conditions, the easier it gets, right? Like you can kind of up your tolerance. You get used to it. It's trainable, right? It's just like heat training, but it's got a little bit more mental for cold, because it doesn't, it can affect perceived effort. And we don't, there are certain like extreme temperatures. Like I have an athlete that lives in Alaska, and there's definitely times where I'm like, yeah, we're not running in sub 11, like either hop on the treadmill or take the day off guilt free, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's kind of one of those things where the more that you get used to it, the more it becomes less of a question, like should I run or not? Like you're like, oh, if it is possible to run, I am going to. If I recognize that it is not possible to run, I will not at all beat myself up about not doing 10 miles and sub 11 and sub zero temps.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, I don't want to edge too close to the winter training talk, because I wanted to do like a 40-minute on that, because I think that there's a lot of good
there.
information to talk about there. I think that kind of wraps it up.
Yeah.
If anybody had a follow-up question. Oh, okay. Yeah, Chrissy, you do have kind of a pretty cold race ahead of you this weekend.
I also have an athlete with a cold race. Layers.
Yeah, really, you can't do anything about that race weather. You just they're gonna hold the race, and you've got to go out and do it. So being prepared for that is important.
A trick I learned during Leadville is that if you have shells that are like if you have multiple shells, bring multiple shells. I know that not everyone has multiples, but if you have like an outer layer and it gets wet, and then like if the race starts and it's rainy and then it dries off, instead of taking a wet layer and shoving it into your pack where it stays wet, tie it around your waist so it can kind of dry out, and you can use your own body heat to dry it out a little bit more without sweating into it.
That's a really good tip. Really good tip. Yeah, I think a lot of those jackets after a certain point too just end up getting like saturated all the way through. So if you do have a backup that you can put in a drop bag or something like that, my biggest, I'll dive into it for 2 minutes, because I think this is pertinent for you, Chrissy. Warm up with extra layers on, so you start to break a sweat before you race. And then try to push your warm-up time really close to the start of your wave in the race. So you literally take off that one extra layer, so you can, run for it, assuming you're going to feel a little bit warmer, even though it's going to be cold, you will feel a little bit warmer. Push that warm up right up to the point where you're going to race, shed that extra layer, and then go out. That's something that I do at home in the winter, because we have a few weeks inevitably every year where we're running at single digits. I warm up in the house, do strength circuits with a puffy on, and then I'll shed the puffy right before I leave the house. I've broken a sweat, my body's warm, and then I'm prepared to get out there.
To address Derek's point about sopping wet, cold feet, I would say, if you have drop bags, you could definitely leave. I would put socks, multiple changes of socks in a Ziploc bag, and either carry that or put it in a drop bag along the way, and maybe even a secondary pair of shoes after the swampy section, if you have a backup pair of trail shoes and you're able to switch out and the cold feet are really bugging you. Fresh socks can go a long way, but fresh socks and shoes could be a game changer in that scenario if available.
Yeah, if you do have that option, I think the fresh sock goes really well with the fresh shoe, because as we talked about, if it's really cold and or still really wet, those shoes probably won't dry that quickly. So being able to change out the entire setup might be helpful. I think this is something that is like really important for people who are doing longer races, especially like never go into an event with just one pair of shoes.
Oh, nice. They're doing the same race. Go
Oh,
team.
sweet.
Stay warm, you guys.
Yeah.
We'll struggle together.
You guys got to support each other out there. Stay warm.
Yay!
I'm
Yeah,
so
we'll meet each
excited.
other tomorrow.
Pete is dropping some OCR knowledge. Aquaphor and Gold Bond on your feet anytime it's cold and wet.
Oh, yeah. And that reminds me, too, something that I started doing is putting Body Glide on my feet before wet runs or races. It really helps to keep away the moisture and then potential for blisters. I think I got that tip from you, Pete. I can't remember who it was that gave me that tip, but they're like, you got to lube your feet up before you go out there. It makes a difference. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And I was like, oh, this does really make a difference. Because I always get blisters towards the end of a long race, and now I really don't anymore.
Yeah, if you do 2/3, so 2/3 Aquaphor or Vaseline, like whatever you want to use, 1/3 Gold Bond. Just don't use menthol Gold Bond. You can use it on your feet, but like if you're gonna like lube anywhere else, like you're gonna regret it. I made
Use
that
menthol
mistake.
sparingly.
Yeah, I've been there. But yeah, so you mix them into like a thick gray paste, and it's the best thing. Like I've been soaking wet for 24 hours, and like I didn't get a single blister. You're gonna feel disgusting in your feet, but it helps. And it helps keep warm too.
Okay, Derek and Chrissy, definitely take notes there.
Yeah.
I would, if you've got time to run to the store today and pick up some
Aquaphor and Gold Bond.
and Gold
Yeah, that
Bond.
seems like something you could get at pretty much any pharmacy.
Yeah, and I think the Gold Bond trick actually is really helpful in a drop bag in a long race too. So if you notice your feet are starting to get wrinkly when you go to change your socks and your shoes, powdering up a little bit is a big move.
I like 2 Tom's Blister Shield powder.
Cool. Well, cool. Derek and Chrissy, good luck tomorrow. I can't wait to hear about all of the wonderful cold miles.
It sounds
that you guys
really
have.
epic.
Yeah,
like,
you guys
this
are
is a
going to crush.
very vertiginous race. Derek did a lot of 5x3 minute hills to get here.
Hell yeah. You
Very
guys are so ready. Well, cool. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll put this up on YouTube as soon as it basically renders. We'll be around next week for more
and
calls.
thanks for sending questions over email, in the logs, on Facebook, in the chat. No question is too small.
Yeah, seriously. And people it seems people like this and are utilizing this information. So thanks for everybody who's been participating. We'll see y'all next week.
Yay.
Adios.